Welcome to the Floor Academy podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Hedin, owner of Illustrious Hardwoods in Mesa, Arizona. I want to encourage you to learn while you earn. This week's guest is Jeffrey LaClair with Phelps LaClair, an estate planning, what do I call it? They're estate planning attorneys. And so they will help you get your estate and will, all that stuff in place so your loved ones have it as easy as possible to move themselves forward in the future without struggling, and you can rest assured that they are well taken care of. I want to make sure that you can go visit flooracademypod.com. You can find all the places we stream over there. Make sure you check out our business budget spreadsheet. It also has an employee labor burden calculator. And if you are finding this content helpful, you can visit patreon.com/flooracademy. Even $5 a month goes a long way in helping make sure that this show continues to be around. Before we jump into everything, the Floor Academy podcast is sponsored by Trolama, the trade labor marketplace, where businesses can find skilled trade labor, such as flooring installers, and where flooring installers and other skilled tradespeople can find permanent or project work. You can set up your profile at trolama.com. That's TRALAMA.com. Or download the app from the Apple App Store or Google Play. And remember, Trolama is always free for skilled tradespeople. Jeffrey LaClair, thank you for joining us. I'm going to open up the floor to you. Why don't you let us know who you are, what you do, why you do it, how you got into it, all that fun kind of stuff, and then we can really jump into the nuts and bolts of it.
All right, sounds good, Kyle. Thank you for having me on the show. My name's Jeff LaClair. I'm an estate planning attorney with the law firm of Phelps LaClair. So my firm was actually established back in 1980, a few years before I was actually born. And so, our firm focuses exclusively in estate planning. And so, kind of just a little background about myself and how I got started. But I was born and raised in Michigan. And while I was in school, I thought I was going to go into finance and accounting. I always like to deal with taxes and essentially saving money for people. And what I realized is you never really got to work with the families on the front end. And so that's kind of what was nice about the estate planning. I was taking a course as part of the finance, and it was taught by an estate planning attorney. And so, it was kind of nice. I was able to combine the tax benefits with actually helping the families on the front end. So that's kind of what prompted me to go into the path.
Got it. And was there... You weren't even originally planning on being an attorney, it sounds like. Like you took the estate planning class from the attorney, and then you were like, oh, this is really interesting. I really like this. So what was the original plan besides just being like in finance somewhere?
I never really had a plan, to be honest. It's funny. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and the only reason I went to college is I was playing football in high school, and I wanted to keep playing football, so that's why I started in college. And then, I was always good with numbers, and that's kind of where I started. But I never really had a plan.
Okay. Well, I mean, you did the thing, right? Like you went to college, and then you became a lawyer, and so like that. Now everyone You did the American dream thing, right? Like, oh, if you're going to go to school, you got to become a doctor or a lawyer. There's a high bar now. But congratulations, that's awesome. Did you get there on scholarship, or did you have to like get a walk-on position?
Yeah, it was all walk-on. So I wasn't very good at football. I just enjoyed it.
Okay.
Undersized. So I was able to start out at a Division III school, and you get a few scholarships there. But once you tried to move up into the different schools, it was all walk-on.
Okay. Well, hey, I mean, you got to play a little bit, it sounds like, and made it happen. You enjoyed school and found a way to make it through. So that is awesome. Besides like what really excited you about working with the families and trying to plan things up front as opposed to just dealing with everything on the back end? Like, how did that really become this thing that you latched onto and had a passion about?
I think the biggest things too is when I was in school, I was working for a probate judge. And so I was seeing firsthand how these types of issues would just tear families apart.
Hmm.
And one of my first jobs out of law school, it was dealing with litigation, like trust litigation, where people were fighting over stuff. And after a few years, yeah, it just kind of like drove me crazy. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I realized that, if you're able to help the people on the front end, then you can avoid all of that issues on the back end.
Hmm.
And yeah, it kind of just changed my perspective.
Okay. No, I mean, I think it's a interesting way to go about it. There's the system is made to have loopholes and be easier, but there's people that specialize in it, right? I don't do my own books. I have a bookkeeper. You don't do your own floors. Probably you're going to hire a flooring installer. That's there. You have to go and surround yourself with a team of experts and put them in the place where they belong so that you can be as successful as possible. I don't want to go read all the books on how to take care of my estate. That doesn't interest me. So, but it interests you, and that's great. Like, we can sit down and have a quick conversation. So, I mean, I didn't even really understand how any of this stuff worked. You recently had a talk at a nonprofit here in Phoenix that is for people with children, for families that have children with Down syndrome. And that's how we connected. It was an awesome, informative talk. And I was like, oh, I can't pass up this opportunity. And while we're not going to focus on the special needs aspect of it, just being able to get your affairs in orders. Do you have any kind of statistics? And I know I didn't ask you to plan this, so I don't know if you have them off the top of your head, but do you have any kind of statistics of like how often families aren't prepared for anything happening, and estates go to probate court and it takes months or years to waddle your way through all of it, and time and money is just lost everywhere?
It's funny with the statistics. I kind of take the other approach with it, and I always ask. Um, so I'll kind of turn the question on you. Can you guess the percentage of adults who actually have an estate plan?
I honestly, I bet it's 10% or less.
It's actually 100%. And so the reality is the legislator here in Arizona, like any other state, has created an estate plan for all of us.
Hmm.
And that's the probate system. And so that's where, when I'm sitting down with clients, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just one, understanding their situation and what their goals are, but just making sure that what their goals are, that their plan will actually be achieved by that. Because most likely the plan that the legislator wrote for us is probably not the plan that we want for our family. And we certainly don't want to pay the money to the courts to administer that plan.
Okay.
And so I think I always tell clients, estate planning is really just one, having a plan, and then two, making sure that it's going to work when the time comes.
Okay. And I know one of the things you said that, this is not my world, right? So my understanding was like, I write out a will and it says, child A gets this, child B gets this, my wife gets this, my second cousin 8 times removed can have this little knickknack because they always enjoyed it, and I want to give $50 million to this charity over here. Bada boom, I die, everything's taken care of, it's nice and smooth. And apparently from what you presented, that's not the way it happens, because the will essentially mean nothing. It's not that it means nothing, but it's not as cut and dry as that, right? Like, the probate court would still have to exist because it's just a will, and there hasn't been any estate planning done. There's no trust involved.
Exactly. And I think I hear that a lot. It's often misleading. A lot of people will come into my office and say, hey, I need to get a will in place to avoid probate. But the reality is if we're using a will to distribute your assets, that means the will actually has to go through probate court. And so the probate threshold in Arizona it's relatively low if you look at it, because it's really $75,000 in assets.
Okay.
Or if it's just real estate, it's 100,000. So, if you're putting together bank accounts, insurance, the equity in your home, the probate is really going to affect a lot more people than people think. A lot of times people come in and say, hey, I'm not a millionaire, so I don't know if I really have to worry about this. But it's like, well, it actually is very important, for really anybody. So.
Well, and I mean, $75,000 really isn't a lot of money. That's relatively low, and $100,000 for a home is really low these days, especially in Arizona. You can barely find a manufactured home for $100,000 probably at this point. It's insane. Now, obviously, you're licensed here in Arizona. Is there states that you know of that are more lenient on this? And there's going to be different amounts probably, but is it general rule of thumb, if you don't set up some kind of trust, you're going to end up having to deal with probate court, and it's just going to be a pain?
Yeah, I will say I'm licensed in Arizona as well as New York and Florida, and so yeah, most states are going to be right about 75 to 100,000, and so yeah, every state's a little bit different, but yeah, that's pretty low threshold all across the board.
Okay, so just having the will doesn't take care of us. What do I need to do? What's the point of a trust? What does it do for me?
Really, if you look at the trust, I always explain it. Really, it's going to give three benefits. So first is incapacity planning, and I think this is often overlooked. I see it a lot where I'll have clients that come in and they're relatively young and they never really thought about incapacity planning. If there's ever an accident or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had it firsthand. So I had a cousin at the time. He was 42 years old, and he was out walking his dog one day. There's a car accident, and what happened was the car came up on the sidewalk and it hit him, and he ended up going into a coma. And so at the time, he didn't have an estate plan. He wasn't married or anything like that. And so his mom, he was actually originally from Michigan, like myself, but he was living in Nevada. And so his mom had to fly all the way out to Nevada, hire an attorney just to get the authority to make medical decisions and then to be able to pay his bills. And it cost her thousands of dollars, to go through this during that whole process. So it's like, that's really the first thing, is the trust itself. It takes the courts out of it. And that's, okay. I think the easiest way to think of it is if we have assets in our name, now the courts get involved with that. And so by having a trust, we can keep it private and keep it in the family. And then second, obviously, is when you do pass away, now the assets are owned by the trust. So now the courts aren't involved with the distribution of assets. So it makes it much quicker and more efficient. And I think the third, and we're seeing this more and more nowadays, but the trust can actually provide your beneficiaries with very good asset protection.
Okay.
A lot of times what you'll see with a will or a trust, it just says, okay, if I pass away and my children are over a certain age, we're just going to give them the assets. But unfortunately, over the years, as we've administered the trust over the years, we're seeing that the beneficiaries, that they'll have a lawsuit, a creditor, a divorce, and now all of a sudden a third party is taking the inheritance away from them. And so, yeah, the trust will be able to protect them from that.
Okay. So what the biggest thing, it sounds like, is the incapacity planning, just because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, flying is safer than driving, and especially as contractors, we generally drive a lot, especially if you're the owner and you're out doing estimates and things like that. Like, there's a high chance of an accident happening, and it's not necessarily your driving skills, it's trusting everybody else on the road. And so you're going to be protected from there, and then you're going to be able to distribute everything easier. But it sounds like, and I'm sorry to hear, you said your cousin, or right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, it's tragic. And then mom had to come out, and you're trying to deal with all this stuff, and you can't because you're fighting the court, which makes it probably even more frustrating. So I'm sure court's still involved because you probably have to go and get permission to just take over with power of attorney and aspects like that. But is that process just much smoother because you have all this paperwork in place that says X happened, so now we go to contingency A.
Yeah, in fact, when you have the powers of attorney in a trust, the courts aren't actually involved at all. So we can essentially just use a doctor's note.
Okay.
So like with a power of attorney, like in that case, if my cousin had one, his mom could have just walked into the hospital, showed the power of attorney, and made the decisions. So
Okay.
yeah, and that's the key is with that, it happens immediately. Anything with the court, can take days, if not weeks, to try to get processed. So it just
Okay.
makes it much more efficient.
Yeah. No, and that, I mean, in times like that, that's the last thing you want. Like I said, right? That had to have been very hard on mom to like have to try and take care of her son, but at the same time, she's fighting with the court to even be able to take care of him. And then it's making a bad situation worse. So it sounds like that's a no-brainer to work in there. Now, as for actually establishing the trust, putting assets in it, it's excuse me, you're going to be able to protect them, and you can distribute them, and you can kind of avoid from some taxes and stuff, it sounds like. But before we even dive into that, there's different kinds of trusts. And so there's irrevocable and revocable trusts. And I think from the talk you gave, you're a big fan of the revocable trust because you can take it away, get everything out of the trust, and somebody else could go and establish a new trust. But is there ever a point that if a family had a certain kind of estate, there was a big company involved, a lot of money, that you would suggest that some kind of irrevocable trust goes in place and they're stuck by those, like, essentially it's set up with like bylaws, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, with a trust, whoever's creating the trust is able to set out the instructions within the trust. And so, yeah, really the difference between revocable and irrevocable is just with a revocable trust, it just means the creator of the trust always has the power to change it. So usually that'll be the best option for clients because they want that ability. If things change, they want to be able to change it. Now, when you move into the irrevocable trust, really the two purposes of those would either be estate tax planning or asset protection planning. And so the idea with an irrevocable trust, if you're essentially giving up control of your assets, then what you're doing is you're essentially removing those assets from your creditors and then also essentially removing it from your taxable estate. So depending on the situation, an irrevocable trust may make sense depending on the circumstances.
Okay. But the most common thing you do is you're setting up revocable trusts that can be amended, taken away. Assets could be completely taken out of them. And then if somebody wanted to set something up again in the future, they have the option to do the same thing.
Correct.
Okay. So we come in, we set that up, we set up power of attorney, and I got to guess that you probably have a lengthy questionnaire of if-then statements or something, right? Is that how that kind of works when you're setting up like incapacity stuff? Like if dad is incapacitated, mom takes over. If mom's incapacitated, dad stays in charge. If both parents happen, then person, C takes over and can do things for the kids. Is it just like a game of 20 questions, or like how do you go about planning all this stuff?
It really is. Yeah, we've essentially really processed it where essentially, just like you're saying, if it's not A, then B. But yeah, usually what we like to take an approach with our clients is we say it's a 3-year approach. And so for our clients, we have a lifelong relationship with them where we're meeting with you every 3 years. Because a lot of times where clients have a hard time is they're saying, well, geez, if something happened today, maybe I want my parents or my siblings to do it. But if it's 20, 30 years down the road, I have no idea what's going to happen. And so that's why we like to revisit it at least every 3 years. And that's why I always tell clients, your estate plan, it's really going to be a process. It's not going to be an event where you just set it up once and let it go. Because a lot of times that's what you'll see is I'll be meeting with clients that they set up the plan 20 years ago and now somebody's passed away, but things have changed. And so now the estate plan is not going to be that valuable anymore if it's outdated or not kept up to date.
Yeah, it's with laws changing, it can completely ruin everything you set up. I'm assuming, right? Like you're going to have to stay on top of that, and you may not want it to be the way it was. So once we kind of get through all the incapacity stuff and we're set up, what are we looking to actually move into this trust to help protect our assets and distribute them more easily? Are you I don't even know. Are you avoiding? There's so many different questions to ask, right? Do you avoid taxes? What goes into it? How does it get distributed? Kind of walk me through the next steps of going through this process.
Yeah, and that's truly the most important part is when you're actually setting up the trust itself. I always tell clients, if you become incapacitated or if you pass away, the goal is we never want anything in your individual name, because if something's in your individual name and now you're incapacitated or if you pass away, now we have to go to court to get access to that.
Okay.
So the solution is we just want everything titled in the trust. And literally everything. I always tell clients, anything that actually has a title, whether it's real estate, vehicles, bank accounts, anything that actually has a title, we want that in the trust. And as long as it's in the trust, now you get to decide who controls that in the event of your incapacity or if you pass away. And so if you don't get it in there, then that means the courts are going to decide for you.
Okay. Now, I mean, there's everything kind of goes into this trust, right? So my mind works. And so my wife and I were driving home and she's sitting there asking me questions. I was like, look, I'm not the expert. I can't necessarily answer this stuff. But like, I know if I were to, my son's 12, so at some point he'll turn 16, right? Let's say he comes up with $5,000 and I told him I'll match $5,000 on a car. So he gets whatever you have to put down, I'll match it. So he gets $10,000. I decide I want to leverage the money instead of just outright spending the $5,000. I've now co-signed on this vehicle with him. He's driving around. He smashes into somebody. He has no money, but I'm co-signed on this car. So now I'm legally responsible. But if my son is driving around a vehicle that's just titled to him and he has nothing, they can only go after the insurance money. But if he's driving around a car that's titled to the trust, they can go after the trust.
Correct. We actually I won't disclose too many details, but we had a client, one of the first cases in Arizona, and that exact situation happened. They were having a party at the house. 16-year-old kid took the vehicle out, got into an accident, and they ended up finding the parents responsible. And so now all of a sudden they had to settle for millions of dollars because it was actually titled in their names. And so I get that all the time from clients because, you're just wanting to help out your child. And you know how it is. It's like you put the title in their names and your insurance rates go up. And so that's where you'll see a lot of times parents will just put the title in their names, and then that keeps the insurance rates low. The problem is if the parents are on the title, it's exposing the parents to those liabilities.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, it's better off, maybe increase the insurance, get a good umbrella policy, or just essentially weigh the pros and cons.
But then there's on the opposite end of that, like the trust doesn't necessarily protect assets from individuals being able to come after you as the owner of the trust. However, when we were talking, like, I have a relative that owes the state a bunch of money because of a child that he's not responsible for. That was the agreement him and a girl came to. She eventually needed money, went and got state aid, and they immediately said, who's the dad? Let's find him. Let's get him. So now there's all this back child support. And it was, if we put my dad's house in the trust and leave it in the trust name, he could essentially live there and it's his asset, even though it belongs to the trust, but then the state can't come after it. So there's other, like, if That was my understanding from our conversation. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But there's other ways to kind of skirt the system and protect assets from bad things happening because of certain situations as well, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the major benefits of the revocable trust is you're right. When you're setting the trust up for yourself, it's not giving you asset protection, but what it provides is your beneficiaries with asset protection. So
Mm-hmm.
that way, when you pass away, you don't have to worry about your children getting into a lawsuit or a divorce. You can set it up where now they're going to be protected, and you'll have the peace of mind that what you pass on to them will be protected for them.
Okay. And I'm assuming there's stuff that exists within the trust language that if you're married, because prenups aren't allowed in Arizona, is my understanding, correct?
So no, actually prenups are valid in the state of Arizona. I
Okay.
think that the issue with that is Arizona is a community property state. And so that's
Okay.
where you just really have to be careful if there is marriage, making sure that it addresses those laws.
Okay. So you can, assuming it's community property, right? Like there's this prenup, it's not written well. Seven years, I think, is considered, it's common law at that point.
So there's actually no common law marriage in Arizona right now.
Okay.
And so, yeah, some states do have a certain period of time where they would treat it as common law.
See, it's a good thing I got the expert here. But assuming it becomes community property, right? Like you were together long enough, the state now assumes it's community property. If the assets are in the trust and it's written that spouses are not entitled to anything from the trust, that would protect you, right? Those kinds of things can exist even though it's a community property state. Like the trust can help protect the assets from leaving the family.
Absolutely. Yep. As long as the trust is set up properly, it'll protect against any divorce.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to cut in here real quick for just a second. What's the hardest part of starting and growing a flooring business? Getting clients. If you're serious about taking your business to the next level, you need a marketing partner like Traffic Digital. Traffic is a full-service marketing agency that works with flooring companies all across the country. They'll help you get a continuous stream of clients using the most modern online marketing techniques. So visit www.trafficdigital.com today to sign up for a free marketing analysis. And remember, traffic is with a K. And so what other kind of benefits are we looking at by being able to put these assets in here and distribute them through them?
So really you have, those three different parts. So first, incapacity for yourself, avoiding probate at death. And then third is really the beneficiaries. And I think the beneficiary side of things, that's what's, I would say, most appealing for most clients because, first we have to look at the beneficiaries. Are they in a position where they're going to be able to manage the inheritance? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hardest part of my job is I'll sit down with clients and, we go through this and they say, oh yeah, my children or my beneficiaries, they're doing great. I love them so much. I wouldn't have any hesitation about giving them the assets. And then it's like, well, you have to put it in perspective. You're spending your entire life working hard to save money. And then in a matter of a day, all of a sudden your beneficiary or child is going to have your lifelong legacy. Like, can you imagine, all of a sudden being, 20 years old with $1 million in the bank? I mean, it's just
gone.
That's where exactly. And that's where clients just have a hard time understanding it. It's like they love their children, but I think it's just hard for people to be honest with them and say, are they really going to be responsible? And even if we think that they are, wouldn't you rather have that peace of mind that it's going to be safeguarded? So when you're not there, they're not going to blow the money or somebody's not going to influence them or, come take it from them from a lawsuit or a divorce. So.
Yeah. I mean, no, if you're going to work that long and hard and you truly want it to benefit your family, I think this is a no-brainer, especially if you're doing well for yourself. Like the rates that you quoted for where your company kind of starts at to get things going we're very reasonable, especially for something that's going to help set you up and protect you on a long-term basis. I mean, it was a little bit more than a couple $1,000s, but I mean, we're not. You were, I think you said somewhere probably between like 4 and 6, if I remember correctly. And obviously, all lawyers and that do this estate planning stuff is going to be different from areas. And if you have a really big estate worth millions, you might find somebody that's going to work on, percentage basis or something like that. But you seemed like it was a very reasonable cost for being able to set myself up and protect my family, my children, make sure everything's going to be just easy decisions moving forward. Especially for me, I don't know what's going to happen to my daughter. I don't. She has Down syndrome. She's high functioning, but at the end of the day, she's 9.5 years old at this point. Is she going to be able to live on her own? Is she going to have to live in a group home? Will her brother let her live with him? If something happens to us now, does my sister-in-law have to take the kids and they move to Wisconsin and they live with her? There's a lot of scary questions that come up when you start thinking about it. I think that's why people never want to deal with this, but that's exactly why you have to deal with it, is that you don't want it to end in a situation where they're like, well, grandma's right down the road, let's give her to grandma, and grandma is not necessarily the best option for this scenario. So that's another reason why we're looking at doing this, right? Is it puts all the decisions in place so that you're not having to worry about all the ifs and buts and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think, what you started with too, as far as like cost goes, I think that's always important to address too, because, I sometimes will have clients come in and they say, geez, I don't want to spend a few $1,000s, because I would say for a normal estate planning package, if you're doing a trust, you're looking anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000. So it's a substantial amount of money up front, and it's like, I always tell my clients, it's really an investment. We look at, what our bills are every year. We have auto insurance, we have homeowners, but what is your estate plan really doing? It's really insuring all of your assets, not just the house, not just the vehicle. So it's relatively inexpensive when you look at that type of protection. But then it's also that peace of mind. And I think you hit it on the head, is estate planning sucks. It really does. Talking about death and taxes, nobody likes to do that. And so I think what I've seen a lot is, especially now dealing with COVID and everything that people are going through, but people are starting to see what happens to families if they don't have a plan in place. And that's really the biggest thing is, especially if you have young children, and that's the hardest part. When you have young children, to think about, okay, well, if I die, who's going to take care of my children? Who's going to take care of the finances? It's awful to think about, but at the same time, it's like, getting that in place, it really will help the family.
It needs to be answered. Those questions have to be taken care of. And I think what you were saying at your presentation was like probate court will generally take 5 to 10% of a estate by just taxes and fees and courts and lawyers and all of that stuff. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. So if you look at it.
Go ahead. That's where I was going to go with it, right? Like long term.
Yeah, right? I was just going to say, you have $100,000, and now all of a sudden you're going to pay me that much more on the back end if you don't do the plan. And so, we kind of joke. It's like, you can pay me a little now, but you're going to pay me a lot later. And I think that, unfortunately, that's why attorneys get a bad name, because you'll see it a lot where attorneys will just do the wills because they're banking on that probate on the back end. And so it's rough.
Which is a shame, right? Like, okay, I can go to the store and I can buy a will. Like it may not necessarily work, or what, I can go on like legalzoom.com or whatever that website is, right? Like you can just go, and I live in Arizona and I want a will, and $100 later I've got this thing typed up that works. But if I would have invested a little bit more, I would have saved who knows how much. And even then, you want to review it every 3 years. Well, a couple grand up front and then a little bit to review it every 3 years. If I'm building up a significant estate, and I think that anybody listening to this podcast is more than capable of doing that. That's why they're here listening, is that they want to run a more successful and more profitable business, and they are looking to be able to build something that's going to give them their hopes and dreams, and let them buy the toys, take vacations, provide for their family after they're gone. I don't see how you can't not make this investment. It would be silly not to protect yourself and set yourself up and your loved ones up for success and making their life easier after you're gone, right? Nobody wants to struggle through that process. I mean, my grandma passed over 2 years ago now. The house has a reverse mortgage on it. My aunt is the executor of the estate. The house is still just sitting there. I have no idea what all that means and what's going to happen, but I'm sure it needed to go back to the company that holds the reverse mortgage on it. So nobody wants to deal with this stuff. It's tough, but you have to deal with it. And if there would have been better paperwork in place, all of this stuff probably could have just been resolved in a week, as opposed to being frustrated by it and ignoring it for years.
Yeah, unfortunately too, where that really hurts too is, the only person who benefits from a probate or that type of stuff are going to be the attorneys and the courts, because they're charging fees for the entire time. And like you mentioned, I think for business owners especially, I mean, you're spending, your entire life trying to build this business. And so, I think that's the biggest thing too. It's very important for business owners to have that exit strategy where, is it your retirement, or is it going to be, if you pass away, do you want to pass the business on to the family where the children can carry on that legacy? And I think that's another big thing when it comes to business owners, is maximizing that value. So whether you want to cash out for retirement, or if you just pass away and you just want to have that peace of mind that, your wife or loved ones will be compensated for that. I have a lot of business owners, and you may even have it yourself, where, other people, in the industry, and you'll say to them, hey, if I pass away, do you want my business? And that thing, that you can really maximize what you're passing on.
Well, and so, excuse me, there's no, you don't put the business in the trust. The business stays its own entity, right? And you would just filter the profits into the trust. Like you said, you're going to fill the trust with the assets, the homes, the cars, maybe rental properties, unless that's a completely separate business. But you're putting the extra stuff in it so that your profits, your nest egg, that's the stuff you're looking to protect. It's not, you're not putting everything in it.
So yeah, you actually would want your business to be in the trust. And so whether you're operating as an LLC, partnership, or a corporation, you'd want your ownership of that business to actually be in the trust. So for one, if you're incapacitated, now your trustee would be able to operate the business to pay the bills and to continue the business for incapacity.
Okay.
And then two, when you pass away, same thing. Now your trustee can essentially wrap up the business, and the trustee would be able to sell the business. So if you have somebody that that you'd want to sell the business to and stuff like that, now that's all handled through the trust.
So, but your business being in the trust doesn't expose the LLC or corporation past that veil, so that if something, I'm installing a set of stairs, they break loose, and somebody trips, falls down the stairs, and dies, and now I've got a lawsuit on my hands. Okay, like it could happen. I hope not, but it could happen. The LLC being inside the trust doesn't expose the rest of the trust. Is that veil is still there?
Correct. Yeah. So if you're operating through an LLC, you're limiting your liability to the assets of the company. And so with the LLC, when you're just a member, whether it's you or individually or you as the trust, your liability is limited to the assets of that company. So like in
Okay.
that hypothetical slip and fall or something that happens related to the LLC, they can't go after the assets of the trust. Really, the whole purpose of just having the business in the trust is one, incapacity planning, and two, avoiding probate upon passing.
Okay. Got it. I mean, it sounds like everything is pretty much like easier to pass assets, avoid probate court. That's what it comes down to. And then how, when you're passing along these assets, like we kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, but it seems like some things can be left in the trust, whereas some things you may want to give and they come out of the trust, like maybe a some sort of money, but you may want, maybe we divide the money up, right? Like you can give a gift up to a certain amount per, death, and then the rest of the money sits there and it can be pulled out. There's ways to kind of avoid taxes is I guess what I want to get to, right? Like there's ways that your loved ones can keep the money in the trust and use it to live and pay bills, but it doesn't necessarily become income to them or an asset to them because it belonged to the trust.
Yeah, so if we look at the taxation, there's really two separate taxes that you deal with when you're passing assets on. So first would be estate taxes. So I think estate taxes, they're often misleading. So an estate tax is essentially a tax that would be assessed against the value of your estate when you pass away. And that only applies is if your estate is over a certain threshold. And
Okay.
you hear a lot about on the news, whether it's an election year or just people talking about it, but the estate taxes under current law don't affect many people because an estate tax today would only be applicable if your estate's over $11.7 million.
Okay.
So for most people, you don't have to worry about that. The income taxes, on the other hand, that's where it's important, is when we're passing on our inheritance, we don't want our beneficiaries to have to pay unnecessary income taxes.
Okay.
And so starting out as a general rule, an inheritance is not subject to income tax. It would only be any growth on the inherited assets would actually be subject to income tax. And so, yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing is when you're doing the estate plan is one, obviously estate taxes, not too worried about today, but two, structuring it so the income taxes to your beneficiaries are minimized.
Got it. And you can pass like a significant amount of money, and you said it's only the growth on the money. So is that if it's sitting in the trust earning interest, or if it's handed out and then once they have it, if they invest it and then there's realized capital gains on top, then they're paying the. Break that down a little bit more for me.
Yeah, so on the inheritance, so if we use like a hypothetical, let's assume a beneficiary receives $100,000. The $100,000 to begin with is not subject to income tax.
Okay.
But if the beneficiary turns around and let's assume that they invest it in stock and that stock pays dividends, which generates income,
Yeah.
then only the income would be subject to taxes.
Okay.
And really, it's just looking at, is there a recognition event? So if they put that $100,000 into real estate, well, there's no taxation there. But if they were to later sell the property, then that's where a tax would be triggered at that point.
Okay. So you kind of get the initial investment for free, and you pay on the gains.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. The ability to keep it in the trust, and that's one way to look at it, is if those investments or that inheritance is sitting in the beneficiary's name, and now all of a sudden they have a lawsuit, creditor, divorce, now all of a sudden that inheritance is going to be exposed to those third parties. So the ability to keep it in trust is able to give them asset protection because, like we talked earlier, the irrevocable trust for yourself, it's not giving you asset protection. but it can provide your beneficiaries with very good asset protection.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry, somebody was asking a question, and I'm trying to get them to give me the specific question they want. They want me to ask about mixed couples, and they're meaning divorce, but I don't know exactly what they want answered about it. So we'll see if my buddy George chimes back in here. From the once everything goes in, once it's handed out, you're setting people up in place that if I am the creator of the trustee of the trust, I'm the trustee. If I die, somebody else gets to become the trustee, and they essentially take my place, or is it that they just have power of they essentially get like power of attorney, they get power of the financials, and then they would have to take away the trust and set up a new one?
So really both. And so, yeah, if something happens to you, whether it's incapacity or if you should pass away, that would be the role of the successor trustee, who would now step into your shoes as the trustee. And now whatever instructions you've given to the trustee has to follow as far as, distribution of assets and so forth. Then when we talk about the distribution of assets, that's where there's a question is, well, do we want the assets just to go to the beneficiary individually, or do we want to allow the beneficiary to keep the assets in trust? So then that way, one, if the beneficiary has an issue, like let's assume they're young, immature, or maybe they have substance abuse issues or they have financial issues, now we can protect them from themselves. And then second, protecting them from third parties. So if they have a lawsuit, divorce, we don't want a third party to be able to take those assets from them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. So he's saying trust and LLC and trust for mixed families. So I guess essentially, if there's multiple people involved, then there's a divorce and then a remarrying, and there's, we kind of hit on it earlier, right? You were talking about how you can write it up so that the divorces don't affect it, and it stays within the original family as long as it's written up correctly. And then we were talking about the LLCs earlier, to where they can be in the trust, but only up to the point of you're giving the people the power to handle the business, but even though the LLC was within the trust, it was that only the assets for the business, because it's an LLC, can be gone after if something happens.
That's correct. Yeah. And so, you look at it from the beneficiary aspect of the divorce protection. And then you're right. If we have multiple LLCs in the trust, then we're still going to be limiting our liability to the assets of that particular LLC.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And then what other benefits, or what haven't I asked you that I should have asked you at this point that we need to hit on and make sure people understand the value in this, that this isn't something that we're just talking about for fun. This is something that you really need to go and do. And I don't care if you're 20 just starting a family and super young, or you're 80 and on your deathbed. Like, let's get this taken care of and help people.
Yeah, I think when I work with my clients, I try to make it as simple as possible. And so what I always tell clients is, estate planning, it can get very complex, it can get very complicated, but really it boils down to two questions. And it's really, who's in charge and who's going to get your stuff. And if you don't put the plan in place for yourself, the state will make that decision for you. And so I think that's the key, is just understanding that it's going to happen eventually. Death and taxes, they're a certainty.
Yes.
And so it's more just about being proactive and making sure that we minimize that on the back end.
Okay. That's what I had. So if I remember, you can set up different people for different stuff. Like if I became incapacitated, I could give I can decide whoever gets power of attorney. And if I wanted to like supersede my wife, I could say that my 12-year-old son can have power of attorney. Although he probably needs to be 18. So let's say he's 18. And and it's not that I want to do that. I'm just, you can set it up to say this person gets this. And so you can give medical power of attorney to somebody. You can give the like financial decisions to somebody, and you can give there's different things. So what are the different things that I can kind of hand out and assign to people? Because, you know, my wife may have my best interest at heart with medical decisions, but she's not going to want to go and sit down with the financial planner and get into all that stuff. That's my thing. I love the numbers. And so I need to find somebody that I can say, this is the person that's going to handle the finances.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example is, you know, really, if you're looking at incapacity planning, you're looking at, well, who's making medical decisions for you? Who's making financial? Mm-hmm. And so in that scenario, it could be two completely different people for the reasons that you listed. But then if we fast forward and now all of a sudden we're talking about the issues for our children and saying, well, geez, who are the children going to live with? Who's going to manage the money for the children? That's where I see a lot of times where people say, geez, you know, I really trust my brother. You know, he's a great parent, but he's awful with money. You know, I just would never trust him with money. So that's where when you set up the estate plan, you can tailor it and say, okay, well, you know, maybe the children live with your brother, but maybe you're going to have an uncle or somebody like that oversee the money. So then that way, you know, your brother's not going to blow the money all at once. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest thing is when you get into the planning side of things, you can customize it however you want. And obviously every family is going to be very unique.
Does it have to go to a family member? Like if I have a financial planning firm, can I assign the firm the responsibility of managing the assets? I think there can be an accountability issue if it's just given to one person, because who's to say that now they have all this financial power, they don't just somehow find the loophole of like, oh, this was miswritten, I don't have to manage it properly, I'm going to shut it down and take the money away, or things like that, right? Would there be an advantage to assigning like a firm to manage the investments of the trust to make sure that they continue and move forward in a fiscally responsible way?
I would say there's ways to do it. I would say initial question is, you know, naming a financial advisor or financial firm. So generally speaking, a financial advisor wouldn't be able to serve in the role as a trustee just because they have essentially an ethical obligation and there would be a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Now that being said, you know, if we go back to that situation where now let's assume that, again, I'll stick with that and say that maybe your brother is who you'd want the children to live with, but he's just terrible with finances. Mm-hmm. So that's where you can appoint somebody else to be the trustee to manage the finances. And so it doesn't have to be a family member. It could just be somebody that you know and trust to serve in that role. Admittedly, I'm actually really biased against attorneys or, you know, trust companies serving in the trustee role, because unfortunately I see worst case scenario where the attorney abuses it or the trust company abuses it, and it's nearly impossible to get them removed. So I always tell my clients, you know, name somebody that you know and trust, whether it's a family member or a friend. They don't have to be the smartest person on the block, but they can go hire your financial advisor to do the investments and to manage the money. But the key there is if, let's assume the financial advisor is not doing a good job, or if it's legal related and I'm not doing a good job, well, they can just simply fire me and replace me. And so I think that's the biggest thing is we want to keep the control within the family or trusted friends.
Okay.
And not give that to a third party.
Okay. I mean, I guess for something that may be semi relevant. A conservatorship, like what's going on with Britney Spears, that doesn't have to do with an actual family trust. That's something because she went nuts and her ability to make decisions was kind of taken away from her and assigned elsewhere, and then all this other nonsense has happened from that. But is that somewhat similar to what can happen with a family trust if there's like a bad trustee named?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good example because that's been publicized is so the conservatorship, and so we talk about probate when you pass away.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about a conservatorship or a guardianship, that's really the lifetime probate. So that's where you're talking about if somebody is unable to make financial decisions or medical decisions on their behalf. And so, like I shared about my cousin, that's what his mom had to go through. And so, unfortunately, in the Britney Spears case, the court appointed her father, who arguably turned out to be the wrong person for that role.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where if Britney had an estate plan in place, she could have chose who that person would have been instead of having the court to decide that.
Okay. So with the estate plan, well, okay. So let's say what if I write up my estate plan, right? I have this trust put in place and I name, Bob to become the trustee, but he's mismanaging it and he's abusing it and he's not taking good care of it. Do my kids have the ability to go to court and say, look at what Bob is doing? We need somebody else to be in charge of this on our behalf because he's, squandering what my dad created for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And whoever serves as a trustee, they have a duty to provide an accounting to the beneficiaries. And so they are required to disclose to the beneficiaries what the assets are
Mm-hmm.
and how they're being managed. So yeah, if there's ever a mismanagement issue, the beneficiary could simply go to court and have the trustee removed for that.
Okay. So there are protections in place. Like things have to slip really far out of control, it seems, in order to kind of have everything get squandered and be taken away.
Correct. Yeah, there's always going to be safeguards in place.
Okay. And it's not that if something happened to my wife and I now, my 12-year-old son and my 9.5-year-old daughter, they're not going to understand what would be going on with any kind of finances. And so that's where naming somebody would be taking care of the trustee and have that entity. I name somebody else as the financial advisor, and the two of them have to work together to hold each other accountable to do what's best for the assets in the trust.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and yep. In that case, whoever you chose as trustee, they're required to give an accounting to your guardian. And so that's where, I'll have clients where they say, you know what, I want to have two different people so we have a checks and balance. And then that's how you can set it up through the trust.
Okay. So it's, I mean, this is what you went to school for. This is your profession. There's, it's, you guys have all the legalese of X, Y, and Z, and it's all very pre-planned out. And there's been plenty of situations of X, Y, and Z, and the language is all in place already to kind of prevent these things from happening. I'm doubting that there's nothing new under the sun that needs to be. I'm sure things come up as laws change, but that's why you're monitoring it and wanting to meet up with clients again every 3 years. So it seems like everything is pretty straightforward, and you have a good set system in place to make sure that there's nothing bad happening. People aren't going to be able to just walk off with all the assets in it and not be held accountable for that.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. Like I mentioned earlier, our firm's been around since 1980. So as we're administering these trusts, we're constantly updating our planning itself,
Mm-hmm.
because we do see those worst case scenarios. But that's the biggest thing, is just knowing from experience what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I kind of asked before, and then we went on another little tangent, but anything that you think needs to be said, hit on. I didn't ask the question. We missed. I don't know. Is there anything that you just needs to be thrown out there and explained?
No, I think that really covers all the different aspects.
Okay. And look, this is like a quick overview, right? This is not one stop shop. Like go run out and pick up a trust form and fill it out yourself now. Please go get the professional. Go hire a professional to do this, folks. This is the why do I need to go and do this talk. That is for sure. Oh man, I screwed up. Oh well. I'm a naughty boy. So all right. If anybody lives in Arizona, New York, or Florida, or they are a snowbird, how do they find you? How do they reach you? And give me your quick your pitch of where people can find you online.
So for our clients, so our website is going to be PL Estate Planning. So it's P as in Peter, L as in Larry, estateplanning.com. So yeah, if you go to the website, the biggest thing for us is we want to be very educational when it comes to working with you. Our goal is to educate you to make the decision that's best for your family. We're not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Our job is to educate you. And so on our website, if you're wanting to learn more about estate planning, so we offer actual seminars. And so the seminars, you can either come in person, so we'll hold those at restaurants every other week. And so if you want to come in for a free dinner and get to learn about the estate planning process, you can sign up for the seminars there. And then I know a lot of people are too busy for that. So if you just want to do an actual virtual seminar, we also have those on our website. So I would say, yeah, even if you're not in Arizona and we're not able to help you, if you just want to go learn, that website will have, very good tools there where you can just learn more. And again, I think estate planning, what it boils down to is just one, making sure that you know what your goals are, and two, making sure that your estate plan is going to accomplish that. So hopefully that'll help.
No, I love it. And attend a seminar, even if you're not in the area, get the info and then look up somebody in your area. In fact, Jeff went to school with people. He probably knows somebody in another state that does this. And so you might be able to reach out to him and say, hey, I'm over here. Who do you know? So, man, vast topic, lots to consider. We've only scratched the surface, I'm sure, but I appreciate your time, and your knowledge, your wisdom. There's a lot of value to be taken away from this. So I thank you, especially I know it's night. You finished working all day. You got a little one at home. So I know your time is valuable, but I very much appreciate you coming on and giving us your wisdom.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Kyle, for having me. And yeah, there's actually a really good football game on. So.
Yeah, I got to look at that. I got a bet with my buddy in Green Bay about the outcome, and so hopefully we're winning. And I'll have to check in on that in a little bit here. But all right, folks, that's all the time we got for this week. So make sure that you continue to learn while you Learn while you earn. Put in your earbuds, get down on the floor, install those floors, listen to an audiobook, listen to this podcast, listen to some of the other great flooring podcasts out there. Check out the website, go to the store, see what kind of merch you can get. If you're watching live, that shirt back there is available in lots of colors. You can get a hoodie. Somebody wanted fanny packs. We got fanny packs now. You can get a mug, you can get a beanie. It's getting cold. Get a hoodie and a beanie. You're going to look great. Flooring Domain is an award-winning online flooring directory and service marketplace that helps you find more clients, grow your online presence and reputation or your brand. Whether you are a carpet store or flooring installer, perhaps a tile contractor, there are jobs for everyone, with a daily stream of clients visiting Flooring Domain and looking for experts like you. Flooring Domain offers a free listing option that allows you to find new client leads. You can set up a free account at Flooring Domain by visiting flooringdomain.us. Have you ever tried to install LVP on steps only to struggle with the solution for the stair nose? Introducing Snap Caps by SnapTech. You simply send SnapTech the exact LVP your customer selects, and they'll turn it into a perfectly matched stair nose that clicks flush into the tread plank for a simple and reliable solution. Visit www.snaptech.biz to learn more or order. In fact, I got a sample, and so for those of you tuning in, here we go. They will take the plank. It's the plank locking mechanisms over here. They have a machine. It heats it up. It bends it around. You can now slide that on. And like I said, you just snap the other plank right in. Super cool. I know some guys are fabricating them on site. I wouldn't want to deal with it. I'm gonna send that stuff out. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will be back next week. See you later.